you, Jerome. Thank you, Robert. Don't you just feel like letting your light shine? Yeah. I love that song. It takes me back to Sunday school at Calvary Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas. And Piney Grove Primitive Baptist Church in Strong, Arkansas, where they washed feet twice a year. Never understood that, but it makes more sense today. Piney Grove, they didn't have instruments. It was one of those really primitive churches, and they just sang a cappella. That was my grandmother's church. And we sang This Little Light of Mine every Sunday. I just enjoyed that. Thank you. That was a great rendition. It was great to have you all join in. So I want to talk to you today about the light. The light. But before I do, I want to share this with you. This was overheard at a high society meeting, maybe Unity somewhere. And two women were talking. And one woman said, "My ancestry goes all the way back to Alexander the Great." Her name was Christine. She's back there. Alexander the Great. And she looked at Miriam and she said, "How far do you go back?" She says, "I don't know. All of our records were destroyed in the flood." So Steve, if I can have that stand, that would be great. Thank you. So as you know, I co-facilitate the Metaphysical Bible Interpretation class on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. And during the last 2 Sundays, I've been talking about light and talking about Dr. Lieberman's work. I've really been fascinated with his book, Luminous Life. If you're not going to be here Thursday, definitely get the book. I know you will enjoy it, but I'm looking forward to hearing him. He quotes medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who says, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love." Then he quotes Lin Chi, the 9th century Buddhist master, who says, "If you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. Because if you see Buddha outside of yourself, then it's not him." So what we're talking about is the light in you. What you see outside of yourself is you. It's a reflection of who you are and what you're here to be. So God, Buddha, source, and witness, as we are all within us. So I want to start off with Marianne Williamson's quote that I'm sure you've heard many times before. "Our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate. It's that we're bigger than that." I'm going to paraphrase. We're not inadequate. We are more than we even think we are. Our greatest fear in life is that our adequacy may outshine someone else. We might ask ourselves, as Marianne says, who am I to be brilliant? Who am I to be gorgeous? Who am I to be great? Who are you not to be? You are given one light. You are born with one light. And if you don't let that light shine, it's no one's fault but yours that you hid your light under a lamp. It says in Matthew 5 that a city on a hill should not be hidden. And a light should not be hidden under a bowl, but on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the household. And who's the household? This is the household. Wherever we go is the household. So wherever we are, we need to be letting our light shine. And there are people in life, even family members, who don't like the fact that you've got this big light. And they may spend lots of time trying to dim yours, thinking that that will make theirs more bright. But the truth be told, no one can put out your light. No one. And if you are experiencing that where you may be trying to dim someone else's light thinking that's going to make yours brilliant, it just makes yours dimmer. It makes your bulb a lot dimmer. Which reminds me, how many Unity people does it take to change a light bulb? Anybody know? One. No, none, because we all imagine the light is already present. Right? We don't need a light bulb. The light is already present. So I want to talk to you about my story that I chose today to demonstrate light. It's a story many of you are familiar with if you've read the textbook that Charles Fillmore calls our textbook in unity, the Bible. And it's in the book of Luke, the 10th chapter, the 25th through the 37th verses. The story is called The Good Samaritan. How many of you are familiar with the Good Samaritan? Yeah. Well, in this story, it begins with a lawyer. I know we have a few lawyers out here, and lawyers like to ask questions. They question you and question you and question, see if they could get to the truth. So this lawyer comes to Jesus and he says, how can I inherit eternal life? And instead of Jesus answering the question as the lawyer expected, just give me the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, Jesus uses the Socratic method of inquiry. He answers the question with a question. Now, Rusty is a lawyer, and Rusty probably does that a lot. You ask a question, you go back and say, well, what do you think? Dr. Phil is good at that. How's that working for you? So he asks Jesus the question. Jesus says, what does the law say? What does the law say? You're a lawyer. What does the law say about how you inherit eternal life? So the lawyer goes back to, well-read, well-versed in Hebrew scripture. He goes back to Deuteronomy, which says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. And then he goes to Leviticus, and it says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, good job. You know the law. That is the Mosaic law. You did a good job. The lawyer said, but who's my neighbor? Because, a lawyer has to keep asking questions. Who is my neighbor? Well, instead of Jesus answering the question with a question, he said, let me tell you this story. Now, Jesus spoke in parables. Parables are stories that have meanings within the meaning. The story is not to be taken literally. It's more of a metaphor for life, which is what the Bible is, a metaphor for life. Every story in the Bible, every book in the Bible is about us. And when we read it and interpret it outside the physical, outside the written language, we understand the meaning for ourselves. So Jesus says, let me tell you this story. See if you can get it. There was a man who was traveling on the Jericho road. Now, it was a dangerous road. People knew not to go. It was the seedy side of town. You don't go there. He was on his way to Jerusalem, the city of peace. And he was robbed and beaten and stripped of his clothing. And he lay there dying and bleeding. And a priest comes by. And the priest goes, what a pity, and says prayer, crosses on the other side of the road. And then a Levite comes by. And a Levite at the time was, some of them were priests and others worked and served in the temple. So they were close to the priests and those who believed in the Mosaic law. Love your neighbor as yourself. But the Levite does the same thing that the priest does. In fact, maybe he even tried to put on invisible blinders like we sometimes do when we see something that we wish we didn't see. How many of you pass by somebody with a sign saying, I'll work for food, or I need help, and you put on those blinders? The next car will do something, or the next person, or somebody will help them, or there's shelters all over town. Why aren't they there? The Levite, for whatever reason, passed by this stranger who was laying on the ground bleeding. Then comes a Samaritan. Now let me tell you about the Samaritans. Jews didn't like Samaritans. They were mixed race. They didn't exactly worship in the way the Jews did. They didn't just believe in the Hebrew scriptures. They had their own way of being. They were from the other side of the tracks. Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. Now, the Samaritan knew this, right? So if you know that people don't like you, sometimes we tend to dim our light, don't we? We don't want to show up. We don't want anybody to notice us, or we don't want to make any scene. Try to be small. Your playing small, as Marianne said, doesn't benefit the world. This Samaritan knew better than to play small. The Samaritan saw the man laying there and tended to his wounds. Took out wine and dressed the wounds. Wine had a cleansing effect. That's all he had on him. Took out oil to soothe the pain. And oil was precious in those days. You didn't just go around giving oil out to people. The Samaritan then put the victim on his donkey and led him to an inn at the end of town, to an innkeeper, and paid the innkeeper to take care of this man until he returned. And if there was still a bill that needed to be paid, he promised he would pay it when he returned. So Jesus says to the lawyer, so which one of these people do you believe loved their neighbor? Was it the priest, who is a godly man, who knows the Mosaic law, who understands what it means to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind? Love your neighbor as yourself? Was it the Levite who, following in the priest's footsteps, ignored the man too? Or was it the Samaritan? Now, to say with his mouth that a Samaritan did something good and to praise a Samaritan was really difficult. But he finally got up the words to say, the Samaritan loved their neighbor. How about that? Sometimes the people we least expect, sometimes the people we prejudge, have the greatest character. And we're so busy looking on the outside or some preconceived notion or something we've been taught that we don't take the time to look that person in the eye and find out who they are. I believe it's attributed to Shakespeare that the eyes are the window of the soul. That's where the light comes in, and that's where the light shines through. This Samaritan used their eyes to see that this was another human being. This person could have been a Jew who hated Samaritans. The Samaritan didn't care. Didn't ask for any ID, didn't care about, spillage of blood or contamination. Wasn't concerned about that. Only one concern, and that was to love my neighbor. What can we learn from that lesson? That's what the study of metaphysical Bible is about. What does this mean to me? How does this apply to my life? In Dr. Lieberman's book, he talks about the fact that we have to believe with our hearts in order to see the truth. And he gives an example. The chapter is called Awareness. And he gives the example of a woman who came to him with double vision. And he said he talked to her about her history, and she was born with crossed eyes, and everything she saw was double. She couldn't drive, she couldn't read. And he allowed Spirit to speak to him. His insight told him to put contact lenses in her eyes. So he put soft contacts in her eyes, and then he had her stand up, walk around the room, and then step outside. Then he brought her back in, and when she came back in, he says, how does it feel? She says, I can see so clearly. The one contact lens provided perfect vision, 20/20 for distance, and the other 20/20 for a close-up. Now, he didn't know that this was going to work, but he listened to this intuition, this light that we all have coming through us all the time, and sometimes we ignore. And the woman said, oh my God, I'm not seeing double. He was so thrilled that he had listened to this Spirit in him and tried this on her. For the first time in her life, she was not seeing double. And then she says, but you don't understand my problem. You see, and I've had this all my life. And she started telling her story again that she had already told him before he did this. She started telling him the whole story. And when he said, but that's okay, let me tell you what I've done for you. I know I can help you. If you do this, you'll continue to see, and you won't be seeing double. And maybe you'll be able to drive. She said, but you don't understand. And she started telling the story again. You know, someone said there are none so blind as those who will not see. How many times have our stories kept us from letting our light shine? Here was an opportunity to shine a light in her own life, and she was so grounded in her old story that she couldn't see past it. Has that ever happened to any of you? Maybe now, maybe happening to many of us. I can attest to that. He said it reminded him of a story he'd heard about a man who had back problems. And he goes to the doctor and he says, my back really hurts and nobody's been able to help me. And the doctor says, you know, I think I can help you. He says, but you don't understand. I've been to 10 doctors, nobody can help me. He says, let me try. I think I can help you. He said, yeah, but you don't understand. And finally, Dr. Lieberman realized some people are just stuck in their stories. And no matter how many times you tell them, you don't have to stay there. They're comfortable, and they don't realize they're stuck. And they're the reason their light is not shining. So what are we doing to make sure our lights shine? Duke gave us an experiment a couple of weeks ago in staff meeting. He said, this temple is your home. This temple is a dwelling place for a lot of people, and we should make sure it is in perfect order. So if you see something in disarray, do something about it. Now, little did we know it was a real test, like the lawyer, you know, So we're going about our business, and we all stepped over something on the floor, a piece of cotton or something. Later we learned Duke had planted it there, so. But it was a way of teaching us, when you see something, do something. That's letting your light shine. That's what the Good Samaritan story is really about. When you see something, you have a responsibility to do something. Otherwise, if you didn't see it, you know, I told him, I don't look down, but you know, that didn't fly. But I'm more consciously aware now of seeing and doing. The Good Samaritan saw a situation. All the others saw something, but they did nothing about it. But the Good Samaritan saw it and realized the responsibility we have when we love our neighbor is when we see something, do something. And there are lots of opportunities to do something. You could call 911 when you see an accident. Maybe you're not safe, you may be 3 lanes away, but and maybe other people have called, and sometimes we say, oh, somebody else is probably already taking care of that. How do you know that? Shine your light on the situation. The more light, the better. Shine a light on it. When you let your light shine, you open the way for all of the lights to come flooding in. Remember President Bush, the senior Bush, started that campaign, 1,000 points of light? He was onto something. Right here in this sanctuary are 1,000 points of light. If we each shine our own individual light, think of how bright things would be. Think of what changes we could make in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our world. On Wednesdays, we sing a version of This Little Light of Mine that adds the Chinese proverb. And after each verse, this little light of mine. When there's light in the soul, there's beauty in the person. When there's beauty in the person, there's harmony in the home. When there's harmony in the home, there's order in the nation. When there's order in the nation, there's peace in the world. No more living in fear. We're going to let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. So today, look around you. When you see something, do something. Let your light shine. Let's think on that as we move into meditation.